Hi there, and thank you for coming back to part 2 of the video. We're going to start this part with going over the different types of sampling. First two are pretty easy. First one is random sampling. So a random sample is when the sample is chosen from the entire population randomly. So that's just your basic draw a name out of a hat kind of sampling. This way, each member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. The selection of any particular individual does not affect the chances of any other individual being chosen. Number 2 is your volunteer or voluntary. So, voluntary sample is when the researcher invites the members of the population to participate in the survey on a voluntary basis. Easy peasy. So, for instance, if you emailed out a survey and asked people to complete it and send it in. So that's voluntary sample. Third one, easy one again. This is a convenient sample. So that is when the researcher selects members of the population that are easily acceptable. For example, when a person stands in the mall and asks people questions as they walk by. That's a convenient sample because it's convenient for the researcher. Number 4, a destructive sample is when you are sampling items and they are no longer usable after you have sampled them. So a random sample is taken. Each sample is destroyed during the process of testing. So for an example, if you test how long a brand of light bulbs last, the sample of light bulbs are no longer usable. All right, now we start getting into some that are a little more challenging to understand. Number 5 is called a systematic sample. This is a random sampling or a random starting point is chosen. The sample is chosen by going through the population sequentially. The members of the sample are selected at regular intervals. For example, every 5th person is selected. So in this example, the population consists of 1,100 students. A surveyor wants to obtain a 15% sample. How should this be done systematically? So first of all, let's look at the sample size. So we know we want 15% of 1,100. And that is equal to 165. So that is the size of the sample. Now, how should this be done systematically? Well, what you do is you take the size of the population So I'm going to put here the nth person that you ask is equal to the population size divided by the sample size. So if you take 1,100 and divide it by 165, you get about 6.7. That means you should sample every 6th or 7th person. If you sample every sixth person, you wouldn't quite make it to the end of the list. If you sampled every seventh person, you'd probably get to the end of the list and have to start again at the beginning for a little bit. So you could alternate sixth and seventh person. So that is a systematic sample where you would choose, for instance, every sixth person on the list. The next one is called a stratified sample. So that is when the population is divided into groups that share common characteristics. So for example, you could divide them into males and females. You can divide them into grade 7 and grade 8. You can divide them into teachers, students, administrators. You can divide them into any way you want. These groups are called strata. So each of these are called strata. Or that is a stratum. A particular one is called a stratum. And strata is plural. So the groups you divide them into are called stratums. From each strata, a sample of the members is taken. The sample size of each sample from each group should be proportional to the size of each strata. So, for instance, a middle school has 220 students in grade 7 and 320 students in grade 8. That means there is a total of 540 students. So what you do is you take a look at the grade 7s. There are 220 grade 7s out of a total of 540, and that works out to approximately 41%. So then what you do is you take that 41% and find 41% of the sample. So there's 20 students in the sample, so you take 41% of the sample size, and that works out to approximately 8.2, but you can round it to 8. That means there should be 8 grade 7s and if it's the sample of 20, then there should be 12 grade 8s. This way, if there's more grade 8s in the population, it ensures that there's more grade 8s in the sample. So the population size is proportional to the sample size. Okay, number 7 is called a cluster sample. So in a cluster sample, the population is divided into groups, again, into strata. But in this case, a sample of members is taken from only one or some of the strata. Generally, the strata that are chosen are usually the ones that are more characteristic of the population. So for example, when deciding where to have the prom, the school population is divided into grades 9, 10, 11, and 12. So these here are your strata. Stratum for singular. So the stratum of 12, since it is mostly grade 12 students who go to the prom, we will only select a sample from that stratum. So that's a cluster sample when you only select the sample from a group of the population. The last one is multistage. Sampling. This is similar to cluster sampling, but you would have more than one level of breaking them down. So the population is divided into groups that share common characteristics again, so break them into strata. Some of the strata are chosen, and then those strata are then organized into another level, so they're broken down again. A sample of members from only some of those strata are chosen. This method uses several levels of clustering. So for example, when deciding where to have the prom, the school population is divided into grades 9, 10, 11, and 12. Since it is mostly grade 12 students who go to the prom, we will only select a sample from that stratum. But then we're going to break that group of grade 12s down again into people going to the prom and people not going to the prom. And then, so we will further subdivide that group into students going to the prom and students not going to the prom. We will only select a sample from the students going to the prom in grade 12. So you break it down into one level of one level, and then break it down again and select strata in another level. So that is all your sampling techniques. So what should your sampling size be? It depends. Sample size is relative to the reliability of the results. Here are some of the factors that will affect the sample size and reliability. The size of the population. So a bigger population should have a bigger sample. The variability of the population. The more varied the people are in the population, the larger the sample size needs to be. The degree of precision required for the study. If you need more reliable results, then you should have a bigger sample. And the sampling method chosen. If you have a more varied sampling method, for instance, multistage or clustering or systematic, then you may not need as big a sample size as a voluntary sampling method. So that is all we have on sampling. I hope you will join us for part 3 of the video, which will look at questionnaires. Thank you, and please don't forget to watch part 3.